All right, good morning, everybody. We're all in for a wonderful morning. We have a great session planned for you today, and we're going to get started in just under 1 minute with a video presentation like we always like to start. If you can type in that one word of how you're feeling today. All right. Good morning, everybody, and here we go.
You love me. You love me not. You love black culture, but do you love me? You love how I sound, my voice, these beats, this flow. Not me though, right? You love how I look, my hair, this skin, but me? Nah. We don't get to exist. We're forced to survive. We still fight. We still play while the world burns. On fields that ain't even level. All men are created equal? That's my favorite part. You hate us so deeply, but you're still so impressed. Why can't you see? There's history in our skin. You built this country on our backs. I'm him, he's me, she, us, we are all black.
Power! Power to live right. I got the power! Power! Power to walk right. We got power!
Love me or not, we love each other deeply. We gon' be us. We gon' break bread. We gon' defy gravity. You love my culture, but do you love me? What a world that would be.
Good morning, DLA family. I'm Marion Kelly. I am the remaining co-founder of the Diversity Leadership Alliance, and I am delighted to invite you to this space this morning. It's hard to believe that we are going on 20 years of existence in the Valley of the Sun. And pre-COVID, we were pretty much a Arizona-based organization. But due to COVID, we've become a national and international organization. It makes us pause and think about who we will be for the next 20 years. I hope it includes you. Let me tell you a little bit about DLA's beginning, because we started a long time ago as a corporate organization and realized that if we're going to be a community where everyone is equally valued and equally respected, we had to be inclusive of everyone. And so DLA is a place for everybody. Whether you are a student, whether you are a community of faith, a community-based organization, or John Q. Citizen, we welcome you to DLA. We are a corporate-driven organization because our existence as a not-for-profit has largely been because of corporate donations and sponsorships and partnerships. And if you are interested in doing such, we would be delighted to talk with you about that. But enough about that. I want to talk to you about 2020. 2020 has been a very interesting year. Who knew that 2020 would reveal a pandemic of epic proportion? Who knew that the pandemic would reveal the healthcare outcome differences amongst people of color? Who knew that 2020 would reveal some racist, inequitable treatment of people of color? in a real visible way that everyone had the opportunity to see, because the revolution is being televised. So we're here today in this space because of all of those things and many more. And I didn't even mention the election because I'm hoping that January comes really quickly. What I would like to share with you today is that we are better because of 2020, and we're going to get better in 2021. So we have been able to continue providing workshops every month. This series on crucial conversations and difficult conversations that ignite change has been phenomenal. We have had more people engaged and involved as participants in our workshops as a result of being online and being virtual. Makes us ponder what our future will look like. It will probably be a little bit of face-to-face and a lot of virtual, because we can reach so many more people. As I think about where we've been, we've had conferences where we've had 2,000 people, which was way too many in our estimation. And we reduced that number to 1,000 people at our annual conference. Speaking of the annual conference, we're just off our annual conference, October 29th and October 30th, where we had 800 people registered, 800 plus people registered, and we had a phenomenal 2 days of the Diversity Leadership Conference. We're coming up on our 20th year annual conference in 2021. And we're in the throes of planning it now. So stay tuned, because we are going to have a great 20th celebration, and we want all of you to be a part of it. So I don't want to be here in front of you and between the speaker, because Tim Overton is phenomenal. And I think you're going to enjoy him. I think Tim and I just realized that we might be cousins, but we'll talk about that after the presentation is over. But as Joanna comes to welcome you, and I'm welcoming her to the stage, please put on your seatbelts, because all of us are going to be moving closer to anti-racism at the end of this workshop.
Thank you so much, Marion Kelly. We are grateful for the leadership, not just from Marion, but from all of our board of director members, because that is really how we are guided by an amazing group of individuals that really roll up their sleeves and really help with the strategy and direction of this organization. Good morning again, everyone. My name is Joanna Deshay, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the executive director of Diversity Leadership Alliance. We are here today continuing the dialogue for uncomfortable conversations that ignite change. We started this series at the beginning of the year as a direct response to what we were seeing in the community. And this series is all about listening. It's not just about listening, but also about learning. And really, we created these conversations as a way for us to really have somewhere to have conversations that matter, conversations that mean something. And we wanted for folks to be able to have a space, not just a space, but a safe space that they can come, that they can listen, that they can learn, and eventually walk away feeling like they had some tools in their arsenal that they can use to really ignite change. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. We didn't want folks to feel like they were victimized. We didn't want folks to feel like they had anger and rage, that they had no outlet to be able to express it through. So we are a community. We are your community. And we invite you to be able to come back month after month and have these awkward, uncomfortable conversations, and know that you can really have a space and a place to really kind of impart change, learn and grow, and take that back to your individual spaces and be able to kind of share in your communities as well. So we're really excited that you're here. We're excited that you come back month after month and continue to learn and continue to grow. So we're really pleased that you're here yet again for what will be our last dialogue in the 5-part dialogue series. I want you to know that this is kind of of progress. These conversations were just kind of building on each other. And we know that in order for true progress to happen, it is literally going to take all of us. It's going to take each and every one of us, every race, every ethnicity, every culture, every sexual orientation, every gender, every political view, for us to make true change happen. Yes, it's going to take all of us because we really do need each other. That's how important it is. We all matter. And that's why we really are pleased that you are all here today. We don't have all of the answers. That's the thing that we realize. DLA doesn't have all of the answers, but we have this. We have this platform where you can have these conversations, when you can ask questions that you weren't really sure you understood or knew the answer to or thought you kind of had clarity around. And that's what this is, a chance for you to ask those difficult questions. And so we're really excited that Tim is here with us today, and he's going to kind of bring it all together for us today. So no pressure, Tim, no pressure at all. But we close this year's dialogue, our final dialogue on anti-racism. And the official title of dialogue number 5 is Conscious Approaching Equity, Moving Closer to Anti-Racism. And as we close this final dialogue in the series, we hope to bring together all of the dialogue learnings. And this workshop is going to do just that. It's going to provide key guidance for how to make daily, conscious, and intentional. That's the word right there, intentionality. So daily, conscious, and intentional efforts and actions moving closer towards equity and justice. And reaching equity is really about making conscious choices regarding steps that you will take against racism, whether those steps are in small kind of personal ways, whether they're in a larger group setting, depending on the seat that you sit in, or even if they're against systems, larger systems designed to oppress marginalized groups, thoughts, and people. So before we begin today, we'd just like to take a few minutes to remind everyone about our community rules of engagement. Those are very important. So I want to just take a second to share those with you. So I'm just going to switch over to my power. We're all multitasking here. So I want to just switch over and share my screen with you. And as I read these rules, I just want to remind everyone of them. So I will just switch over and share my screen with you. Okay, so here we go. Frank, can we see those? Got too many things up here.
We cannot see them, but I have them in the chat already, so you can read them from there if you'd like, Joanna.
Very good, that's great. So I'll just read them to you. Our community rules of engagement are as follows. We just want everyone to listen actively and be open to a full spectrum of perspectives. Commit to foster greater empathy. Try to relinquish the need to be right. Ask questions and seek clarification for understanding. Be respectful to both the presenter and other attendees. No one or two individuals should dominate a discussion either in the chat area or the question and answer area. Approach each other with kindness and love. And as a community space, we want to remind you that we reserve the right to remove you from the discussion if you become disruptive to the other attendees. So that is really important that you all are respectful, because this is a community space. And we'll continue to remind you of that. We'll continue to post it in the chat area as we move along. So those are simple rules of engagement that we ask you all to please abide by. So as we move through today, I would love to just take a minute and introduce you to today's presenter. Tim Overton is a civil litigation attorney. And what I want to just talk a little bit more about is his specialty, which is really in the area of training and advising companies on issues surrounding diversity, inclusion, and belonging. He is the member of the National Bar Association, and of course is a member of a lot of other organizations and associations like the Arizona Black Bar and the Utah Minority Bar. He graduated from with a bachelor's degree from Humboldt State University and has a Juris Doctorate from Brigham Young University. But Tim really loves to do work around diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and really has spent a tremendous amount of time in that space. And that's really where you'll hear a lot of the work that he's been doing in that space. So I really want him to even talk a little bit more about that work that he's been doing, even the teaching that he's been doing at ASU's School of Law. So if you all will just give air claps and give your energy, right? And a warm and gracious DLA welcome to today's presenter, Mr. Timothy Overton. Welcome, Tim. Good to have you.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you also to Marion for that introduction and background on DLA, and to Brent for taking care of so many things. So excited to be with you. And I'm going to start off by turning right to my slideshow preparation. And as Joanna mentioned, we're talking about consciously approaching equity and moving closer to anti-racism. I use the word conscious for the same reason why Joanna pointed it out, because we need to be intentional. So many of us know about conscious and unconscious, or excuse me, implicit or explicit bias, right? We learn of implicit bias because of Harvard's implicit association test. And so that's made implicit the common word to use. In my conversations and trainings, I use conscious and unconscious as compared with explicit and implicit. Now, why would I do that? Well, if a bias that I have is implicit or explicit, it's being seen from a third person's point of view. So my biases are implicit or explicit to you. But when I want to work on my own biases, they are either conscious or unconscious. So in order for me to work on my biases, I need to make them conscious to me. Then I can intentionally address them. So those terms are often used interchangeably, and that's fine, but that's why I use those. I'm a big believer that bias is a baseline contributing factor for discrimination, including racism. So what do I mean? Let me give you a little background, and Joanna pointed out that I do a lot of work in this area. It's a labor of love. Do any of you recognize those fighters there on the screen? This is taken from a couple of years ago. Mayweather and McGregor participated in a huge boxing match where there was about $100 million at stake. It was a big, big purse. Well, Mayweather, this great technical boxer, one of the greatest ever, and McGregor at the time was at the height of the MMA fighting world. And so these two got together for a huge match, not unlike, Tyson and Jones just last week, huge match, very, a lot of people watching. Well, if you study some of the trends like I do, you will note that most hardcore boxing fans cheered for the boxer. That was Mayweather. Most hardcore MMA fans cheered for the MMA fighter. That was McGregor. If you didn't fall into one of these camps of hardcore boxing or MMA fans, most people cheered along racial lines. Black and brown folks often cheered for Mayweather, and white folks cheered for McGregor. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, that reminds me of something that happened in my life 15 years ago that changed my life. My brother and I at a boxing match, waiting for the main event to happen. We watched several undercards where other boxers are participating. Boxers that are not well known. And as these boxers come in, we didn't know they were going to be fighting. We didn't know who they are. We didn't research them beforehand. So we just had to make snap judgments about who we were cheering for. And in one of these undercard events, two boxers came in about the same height, weight, size, about the same, it looked like conditioning, physique. And the only distinguishing factor that I noticed was that one boxer was black and one boxer was white. And so who did I cheer for? I cheered for the black boxer. And I didn't even think about it. I didn't even think about it once, let alone twice. I cheered for the black boxer. And in the days, weeks, months, and years after that, I asked myself, why did I cheer for that man, for that boxer? Did I cheer for him just because he was black? Did I think, well, maybe he's suffered discrimination. Maybe he was the underdog. Maybe we have a lot of things in common. Or even worse, did I cheer against the white boxer? Is there something I had against him? What I didn't know at the time that I've learned since then is that I developed some predispositions we call biases, where we make prejudgments based on a variety of biases that I'll share with you today. Before I get to some of those, let me share another example. Some of you may recognize this image. This image represents a key piece of evidence in the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision made in 1954, where the United States Supreme Court required schools to desegregate. Kenneth and Mimi Clark, Black social psychologists in the 1930s and 40s, conducted a test where they showed 4 to 7-year-old children dolls. And here we see one white doll and one black doll. And they asked these children, which one is smart, which one is dumb? Which one is pretty, which one is ugly? Which one is good, which one is bad? And these 4 to 7-year-old children responded, for the most part, associating positive characteristics with the white dolls and negative characteristics with the dark dolls. Now, why would I share that? I love this example because when we talk about prejudices and discrimination and racism in particular, there's such a stigma to it that we will defend ourselves. And I'll talk about why later in this presentation. We will defend ourselves tooth and nail to say, I'm not racist. I didn't do it. I didn't mean that. Well, here we had children that were ages 4 to 7 years old identifying white as good and black as bad. We wouldn't jump on these children and say, you bad racist kid. We would say, what's going on in the system and the environment that these children saw one is good and one is bad? This point is highlighted by the fact that these 4 to 7-year-old kids, these were 4 to 7-year-old black kids. These weren't 4 to 7-year-old white kids where somebody may or may not be putting something in their head or whatever you want to say. These were 4 to 7-year-old black kids who, by observing their surroundings, developed biases, anti-black biases. I want to give you today an experience that will, similar to Harvard's implicit association test, help you identify some of the biases that you may share. They may be individual, they may be cultural, they may be institutional. I'd invite you over the next several minutes to tune in closely, not just to the images that I share, but to the thoughts and feelings that come into your head, because those will inform the conversation I hope we have today. What kind of thoughts and feelings do you get as you see this image of this man? And what kind of thoughts and feelings as you see this young man? How do you feel when you see these guys? What kind of thoughts and feelings do you get when you see this man? And do you have different thoughts and feelings when you see this man? What kind of feelings do you have when you see these men? And do you have different feelings when you see these men? What kind of feelings do you get when you see him? And what kind of feelings do you get when you see him? And do you get different feelings when you see him? I don't know if you recognize him, but Joanna told me if I can get the Beebs into the presentation to do so. So there you go, the Beebs, Joanna, just for you. No, she didn't tell me that. All right. What kind of feelings do you get when you see these men? And do you recognize the man on the left? In our culture, we often will not look closely at a black man in a hoodie because instantly that image of a black man in a hoodie represents danger and fear, right? This is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Peaceful, loving, very good. MLK, somebody did recognize that, very good. What kind of thoughts and feelings do you get here? Some people completely wrote off the NBA for seeing things like this. I hope that you had some thoughts and feelings as you looked at those images and that you recognize that sometimes you may cheer for some and against others. I'm going to be vulnerable with you right now. I hope this will be a safe space for me. I'm going to share with you some of my own biases, thoughts and feelings as we go through this next series of images. When I see these guys, I see construction workers. When I see this guy, I see a construction worker. When I see this guy, I see a construction worker. When I see her, I see a woman construction worker. Do you see that? White, Hispanic, black. For me, I don't recognize a bias racially when it comes to construction workers. But a woman construction worker, something different happens in my brain. My brain says, wow, that's different. I don't usually see that. That's a gender bias. Try it again. Garbage collector, woman garbage collector, right? When our brains have to process new information, we will look at it in a different way, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. What kind of feelings do I get when I see this guy eating this sandwich? I get zero negative feelings about him. Although he's multitasking and driving, that might not be the safest way to drive, right? Especially if you're driving fast and furious. But I don't get negative feelings about him eating that sandwich. I feel some negative feelings here. You share some of that? And even more here. Could you ever imagine thinking, that guy needs to be eating a salad? right? But we'd say that to her, wouldn't we? This is another bias. Why do I share some of these biases? It's often easier for us to recognize biases that don't have to do with race. And I'll explain again why that works with our brains. And then we can recognize some of the more challenging biases. Often as a society, when we see someone that smokes, we think, we question their intelligence, we question their self-control, we question their sophistication. But guess what? 60 or 70 years ago, that wasn't the case. Smoking was a sign of intelligence, sophistication. This is an example of how some societal biases have changed. How do you feel when you see these guys? And how do you feel when you see them on your plane? I remember traveling after 9/11, and if someone was wearing traditional Muslim or Arab clothing, there was a tension that you could feel in the air because of biases. How do you feel when you see men holding hands romantically? Does that give you some kind of discomfort? Or if you see a man dressed effeminately or a woman dressed masculinely? I'm not a huge fan of public displays of affection, but I only have slight feelings of discomfort here just because I'm not a fan of public displays of affection. I have different feelings here. Do you get different feelings from when you see that to where you see that? And do you get even different feelings here, right? This might help reveal to you. If this is more comfortable than this or this, and if you can't even have that on your screen without feeling butterflies or lightness in your stomach or chest, you might recognize that you have some biases here. Now, I'm not here to say, boy, you're a bad person for having these biases. That's not what I'm here to say. But what I am here to say is that you should make these unconscious biases conscious so that you can control them and make sure that you do not discriminate. And you can work on them to become anti-discriminatory. Okay, I'm an attorney. When I walk into a courtroom and I see this guy, I see a judge. When I see her, I see a woman judge. When I see her name, I see a Hispanic woman judge. When I walk into his courtroom, I see a Black judge. When I walk into her courtroom, I see a Black woman judge. I recognize all those things as different. But the first one, all I saw was judge. I didn't see a white male judge because my mind is used to seeing that. That is the norm. And when I walk into a courtroom, I know that I look like a younger looking, big, tall, Black male. And so I know that as a younger looking Black attorney, I need to be very sharp and on the ball in my presentations. I don't get the same amount of slack that I might get if I was 20 or 30 years older, wearing glasses, salt and pepper gray, and maybe facial hair. I also know that after those first few times in a judge's courtroom, that it is far easier for me to distinguish myself because, like the woman construction worker, they're not used to seeing the Black male attorney on a lot of big civil litigation cases. When I see these guys here, I'm not scared. I'm not offended. I'm wondering, man, they must be having a tough day. They're out there. It's hot. You can see the guy on the left sweating. They're having car trouble. That's not good. Are they sagging their pants? Yes. Are they sagging it much further than I would prefer? Yes. I would not prefer to have like one of my sons sagging their pants that way. If I'm by myself, I probably offer them help. If I'm with my family, I probably have my children get in on the other side of the car so they don't open the car and hit their car door and give them an even tougher day. When I see these guys, I probably see a few knuckleheads, right? We probably don't call these guys knuckleheads, but these guys wearing the same clothes, sagging with their butts out the same way. We would never use the word thugs or gangsters like some people would call these guys. We'd call these guys knuckleheads. And if we saw these guys, we would say they're joking, maybe call them posers or who knows what. But we wouldn't laugh at these guys the same way that maybe we'd laugh at these guys, shirts off, posing, holding their pants. We see these guys completely differently, right? We see these guys different than these guys, and these guys different from these guys. And then we see this guy differently, right? If you bump into these guys, you probably laugh. If you bump into them, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. We have this fear for this guy. When you look at this young child, what do you see? A sweet, fair-skinned boy. When you look at this young child, what do you see? A sweet, brown, darker-skinned boy. These two boys, this boy here and this boy here, could grow up in two different worlds based on nothing other than their skin color, right? This is fascinating for a lot of reasons. One reason, these two little boys are actually brothers, full blood brothers, same mom, same dad, brothers, and they can grow up in two different worlds, as sweet and innocent as they are, just because of their skin color. And this guy here that we looked at a few minutes ago, this guy is actually their father. And there we are a few years ago, and there we are more recently. The little boy on the left, Dallin, is the sweetest boy you'll ever meet. They're both sweet. This is the little boy on the right, is Russell. When I'm out with Dallin, people don't give us too many looks. Sometimes we get the look, the negative look, which is heartbreaking for me, but more heartbreaking because he's there. When I'm out with Russell, I don't get the look. I get fearful looks. And especially when he was a baby, people saw me carrying this white baby around and they were concerned. They were very concerned. We should be concerned about the well-being of others, but we should not quick judge or quickly be fearful of someone because of their skin color. But you can see these are two of my 5 children, and 2 of the reasons why I feel so strongly that we need to consciously and intentionally address inequities and discrimination and move closer to anti-racism. Okay, let's give a little background. Previous traditional thought was, okay, when there's discrimination, it's because you got a bunch of bad people out there. We need to get rid of them. We need to find the bad apples and get rid of them. So the efforts were made just to do that. Let's find the bad apples. More recent studies have shown that it's not necessarily about bad apples, but that all of our brains work in ways like we just experienced through these images, where we will consciously or unconsciously have some biases. So what do I mean? Our conscious brains can process about 40 pieces of information at a given time, and our unconscious brains can process up to 11 million pieces of information at a given time. So when we go back to those examples of the construction workers, if I've seen Black, Hispanic, white construction workers a million times, I can process that without even thinking about it. That goes on in the back of my head. If I see new information like a woman construction worker, my active brain focuses on that information. That's new information, and I can only process about 40 pieces of that information at a given time. Our brains evolved to mentally group things together, categorize them, and then tag them with information. This was a survival mechanism. This is how most of us don't remember the first time that we saw fire, that we touched fire, but we know that fire is hot because our brains associate fire with heat. Problems occur when we group these things together and tag them with good or bad and apply them to entire groups, especially groups of people. So let's talk about some story time. Our brains love stories. So what do I mean? When we hear a great story, when someone's telling a story, we lock in and they just have our attention. What's happening is when someone gets your attention grabber, so for you writers out there, and anyone else who, anytime you write, you hear, get their attention right away, grab their attention. What that does is that triggers in the person hearing the story a release of cortisol. And cortisol sharpens your focus and holds on to your focus. So if you've got a great storyteller, you're just linked in and they have you there. Well, once they have you, if they start explaining things to your curious mind that satisfies your curious mind, you say, oh, that's how that works. And that feels good. And when that feels good, it's because your brain has just released dopamine, which has helped you to feel pleasure or satisfaction about hearing this story. The third main chemical that your brain releases is oxytocin. Oxytocin has been called the empathy drug. And what that does, especially if you have a protagonist or someone to cheer for, is it really gets you going for the main character and against other characters. So stories about food can make your mouths water, and stories about quote unquote bad guys can make you angry. It's not as if I'm saying these things in your brain are like drugs. No, I'm saying they are actually drugs and chemicals that change your brain. Think about some of these action movies where your palms are sweating and you feel real feelings. Well, it's just like fear. Whether your fear is rational or not, your fear can be real. So how do these stories work? Paul Zak, over at Claremont University, he did an experiment. He was working with a couple of groups to see how storytelling affected the way that they were willing to donate for cancer research. So he told the first group, about statistics and data and the need for cancer research and the need for donations. And this group gave a certain amount of money. He then, with the second group, showed a video of a father and son, each of them battling with cancer and telling each of their stories about their battle and struggle, and then asked the second group of audience members to donate. Donations doubled because of the story. When we can tie a story to someone, it makes us cheer for them. That's that oxytocin. Another result is that our brains love stories so much, and they will work to receive the dopamine reward. That means they will fill in the gaps that we don't know what goes there. And we don't care if that's contradicting information. We'll just fill it in. So what do I mean? If you're picking a basketball team and you've got me and Brent that are there available, many of you are going to pick me. Why? You can't see how tall I am. I'm a tall, thin, black man. I may be a terrible basketball player, but because we have the National Basketball Association where 2/3 of the men in there are African-American, and we have these societal biases that white men can't jump and that black men are athletic, you would pick me. That's what I mean. Your brain would fill in that gap. And that's where a lot of biases and discriminations come from, is that our brains will fill in the gap because it feels better to be satisfied than to be left on a cliffhanger. Okay. I've mostly been talking to you about perception bias, and this is a tendency to form stereotypes and assumptions about groups that make it difficult to make objective judgments. I want to share a few more types of biases, and then we'll get back into some more stories. An affinity bias is a tendency to warm up to people like ourselves. And you'll see that in a lot of groups and organizations where you'll kind of pick the people that are kind of like you, kind of like I did with the boxer. The halo effect is a tendency to think that everything about a person is good because you like them. You see that in politics. People that, and the opposite is often called the horns effect. People that love President Trump, he can do no wrong. Doesn't matter what he says. He can do no wrong, right? Because he has this halo effect. People who have a strong dislike or a hate for him, he can do no right because you have the horn effect. So you could have President Trump and then President Obama saying the exact same thing. And depending on who said it, someone will say it's the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever. This is the halo effect in action. And then confirmation bias. This is a tendency for people to seek information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs. So we see this on social media. And in fact, the algorithms do that. And a lot of companies use these same algorithms to send you advertisements to what you want to buy. And so this is confirmation bias. We love when people pat us on the back. I've heard the quote that I just absolutely love that says, I don't want to hear your opinion. I want to hear my opinion coming out of your mouth, right? And that's what we often look for on social media. Okay. Biases are often evidenced through microaggressions. So I want you to think about some of these terms and what they may suggest. Where are you from? No, where are you from, right? What might this suggest? Where were you born? You speak good English. Can you teach me how to say something in your language? So my wife and I, which by the way, this is her on this image, that's my wife. Both of us, father's African-American, mom's white or European-American, and I speak Spanish. And so people will often want to know, what is my ethnicity? What is my race? What is my background? So they'll say, where are you from? And I know what they're asking, but I want them to squirm a little bit. I want them to know that they're asking a question that may or may not be appropriate. I'll say, I'm from California. They'll say, oh, where are your parents from? Say, my dad's from Oklahoma. My mom's from California. Oh, okay. And they just kind of wrestle with what it is. I want us to be able to have these conversations so effectively that someone can say, I'll give you some tools how you can know what you want in these kind of situations, but for us to have these conversations where we don't have fear and concern, but we have respect in ways that build bridges. So microaggressions are commonplace, verbal, behavioral, environmental statements that whether intentional or unintentional, they can demean or insult others. And we're going to talk about those quite a bit. Often you might say, nah, I don't see those things around me. I don't see that happening. I'm going to share a video, and some of you may have seen this or something like it, that will help us respond to the, I don't see racism around me. That's not around. It's not there anymore. I'm going to share this video and then chat a little bit about it. Oh, that's not the right one. Sorry, I've got lots of videos. Here we go.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go! The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear? Go!
Okay, so did you see it? Did you see the moonwalking bear? If we are so focused on counting the number of times that the team in white passed the ball, we might not see a life-size person dressed up as a bear breakdancing and moonwalking across the screen. If we are so focused on seeing no discrimination and no racism that we will try to explain away everything around us, we can really not see it. So what happens if we're in this environment where people really don't see it because they are looking somewhere else? Well, we need to have these courageous, intentional conversations so that we can see what's around us. So what is around us? Often it's not just individual, but it's institutional. We hear about institutional racism and institutional bias, right? Sorry, you are simply not the right man for the job. So institutional bias is a tendency for the procedures and practices of particular institutions to operate in ways that result in certain groups being advantaged or favored over others. This doesn't have to be something that's conscious. We don't have to consciously discriminate against somebody. It can just be that we're following the norm. That's what we're used to seeing. Institutional racism and institutional sexism are the most common examples of how these institutional biases happen. And how does that work? Let's go to redlining and racial steering back in housing, where neighborhoods had literally maps, had red lines drawn around neighborhoods that say, this is where the Black neighborhoods are going to be, and outside is where other neighborhoods are going to be. Then banks would deny loans to minorities for houses or only give loans to minorities in minority neighborhoods. And these would create Black neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods, and other issues, right? What does this have to do with anything? This was back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, right? Well, what it has to do is that there are still continuing effects from these policies. Like what? Like economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. And you know what kind of schools are in poor neighborhoods? Schools that are often poorly funded, right? Segregated neighborhoods. I heard Ibram X. Kendi mention that we are as segregated as we were back at the time of slavery. Now, something a lot of people might not know is there was a lot of mixing during the time of slavery because everyone, quote unquote, knew their role. There was a lot of mixing. Post-slavery is when there was a lot more segregation because you no longer had the race-based slavery to show people their quote unquote roles. And so you had to have these Jim Crow segregation laws. Well, now think about your own neighborhood. Do you live in a segregated neighborhood? Do you have Black neighbors? Do you have Hispanic or Mexican neighbors or Southeast Asian neighbors? Or do you have mostly neighbors who look like you? The continuing effects of these policies are wealth inequality, right? If you couldn't get a loan and couldn't get a house 2 generations ago, then you've missed out on 2 generations of wealth. Most of the wealth in the United States, most wealth of families comes because of home ownership and property ownership. And then professional networks. If you are in poorer neighborhoods, segregated neighborhoods, your professional network is going to be different than if you're in neighborhoods with lots of professionals and lots of diversity. So these are just some small examples of continuing effects of some of these institutionally racist policies or bias policies. So I think you may have seen this video before, but I want to share it and chat a little bit about it. I love that video. The look. Why do I love it? Because I can't explain that to people. When my friends say, oh, I don't see any of this racism. I don't see these discriminations. I don't see, what are you talking about? I cannot explain to them that look, that feel when I'm in my neighborhood jogging, which by the way, I won't jog in my neighborhood with a hoodie on. I don't think it's safe. I see that look when, boy, I'll tell you what, I love having my own row on an airplane. I love having that extra space. But it digs under my skin a little bit when other rows are jam-packed and no one sits next to me on the plane, or wherever it may be, on a bus, wherever it may be. And this comes from these anti-Black biases that I talked about, with the 4 to 7-year-old kids in the doll test. But these are just examples. When we can't get a cab, which now we got Airbnb, now we have the rideshare services, so we can pick up those rides. But when you can't get into an elevator, when people look at you in the pool with your child, whatever it may be, these are just small examples of how these biases can play out on a larger scale. Okay, very good. Let's talk about a few of these common phrases that hopefully are less and less common and that we don't want to hear anymore. Indian giver. That's so gay. She acts black. We got gypped. He talks white. Imitating accents or dialects. These are all things that we should eliminate from our conversation, consciously eliminate them. And when we hear them, we should consciously address them. And I'm going to give some tips on how to do that as we have a little more interaction. Talk about a few more things. Statements such as this. When I look at you, I don't see color. America's a melting pot. There's only one race, the human race. These sound like fairly innocuous terms, right? What are you talking about? I say those things all the time. I don't see it. I don't see what's wrong with it. Well, some people, when you hear these terms, it means to them, I don't see your color. Your color does not add any value. You need to assimilate to the majority, right? So it may be that we may say or hear things that are innocuous that we don't mean anything by, but they can cause real issues. Some of you may say, hey, I've said those things and I'm not racist. So now, and I just got this great question that Brent forwarded over. If someone has biases, does that make them racist? And the short answer is no, but let's talk about this. Racism, according to Merriam-Webster, is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race, right? So this is racism. And bias, on the other hand, is an inclination or temperament or outlook, especially an unreasoned judgment, right? So they are not the same thing. They are related. Our biases, if they are racial biases, can lead to racist decisions. But because we have biases, it doesn't make us a quote unquote racist. And let me dive in a little bit more into some of those definitions. So I'm really glad you raised that issue. Racism, and these I took these from Dr. Davis. There are different definitions, but I watched from the first in the series of this dialogues, Dr. Davis gave some of these definitions, and I thought they were good working definitions. Racism, the belief that groups of humans possess different behavioral traits corresponding to physical appearance and can be divided based on the superiority of one race over another. That's good enough, right? Looking at one race, you may say, I'm a better basketball player because I'm black. That is a racist idea, right? Or Brent's a worse basketball player because he's white. That is a racist idea. A judge that's white is more qualified. That is a racist idea, okay? Institutional racism is a form of racism that's embedded as normal practice within society or an organization, right? And so this leads to the discrimination in criminal justice, employment, et cetera. Talked about that in housing just a few minutes ago. Racist, a person who shows or feels discrimination or prejudice against people of other races or who believes that a particular race is superior to another. This is one definition. I'm going to share a little different perspective from Professor Ibram X. Kendi here in a few minutes, but this is a definition that can work also. Anti-racism, a policy or practice of opposing racism and promoting racial tolerance. Anti-racist, a person who opposes racism and promotes racial tolerance. And then discrimination, right? Where we make distinctions based on some of these group characteristics. So these are some helpful definitions. Professor Ibram X. Kendi, author of Stand from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist, says this: a person is not permanently racist or non-racist, right? You're not a noun. You're not a racist or an anti-racist or a non-racist, right? He says that you can be, one moment you can do something that is racist, and then the next moment you can do something that is anti-racist. So in one moment you can do something that discriminates based on race, and in another moment you can try to work to tear down discrimination based on race. So all of us have probably done things that are racist in the past, and hopefully all of us are moving towards making more decisions of doing things that are anti-racist. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Professor Kennedy says racial inequity is a problem, bad policy, not bad people. So what am I talking about? Let's talk about the fact that Black people in the United States are imprisoned 5 times as often as non-Black people. Some people would say a racist thought would be, well, that's because Black people commit more crimes. Well, racial inequity is not necessarily a problem of bad people, but a bad policy. So an anti-racist would look and say, what is it about our policy that incarcerates Black men 5 times as often as others? What is it about how we police them 5 times as often as others, or how we prosecute them more often? And let's look at those policies. So Ibram X. Kendi defines racist as one who is supporting a racist policy through their action or inactions, or expressing a racist idea, right? This temporary identification. And an anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea, right? Okay. Let me run you through a few examples and stories that'll talk about a few more biases, and then we'll get to work here in just a few minutes with more interaction. So who's a more desirable police chief? Someone who's street smart or book smart? Well, this study was done where groups of audiences were asked, who's the more desirable police chief? Somebody who's street smart or book smart. They gave them examples, and to one group, they gave an example that you had this person, this man who had 30 years on the force. He had worked his way up from a beat cop, had served as a detective, had served in just about every capacity as a police officer. And then you had the woman who had these book smarts, had served in countless leadership positions, and who knew how to run an organization very effectively, efficiently. Who do you want as your police chief? Someone with street smarts or someone with book smarts? And in that example, the audience said, well, we want someone with street smarts. You can't have somebody who's a chief that doesn't know anything about being on the streets. We need that man who has the street smarts. To the second group, you had the same book smart, street smart decision, but this time the woman had worked through the police organization for 30 years, and the man had had extensive leadership positions and running organizations. So what's more important, street smarts or book smarts? Well, the second audience said, you need book smarts, you need leadership experience. A lot of people can be on the streets, but not everybody can run an organization. What happened was many of us feel like a police chief should be a man. They're tougher, they're stronger, they mean whatever it is. And so we will change the criteria by which we analyze someone based upon a final decision that we want to make. And you'll see that happening oftentimes. Okay, how can that happen? Many of you have probably heard of this study that MIT and the University of Chicago did, where they sent 1,250 companies resumes that were nearly identical, but half of the resumes came from Brendan, Greg, Emily, and Ann, and the other half of the resumes came from Tamika, Aisha, Rashid, and Tyrone. Brendan, Greg, Emily, and Ann got 50% more interviews than Tamika, Aisha, Rashid, and Tyrone. The resumes were otherwise nearly identical. You see how that bias worked? How all else being the same, just those names resulted in 50% more interviews. Try this one on. Blonde women on average earn 7% more in salary than brunettes or redheads, all else being the same. Education, experience, location, 7% more. And all of them earn 21% more than Black women. In the United States, for every 1% increase in a woman's body mass, there is a 0.6% decrease in household income. Yes, based on how a woman looks, your income is going to follow that. Tall men could see biases work in their favor. 58% of Fortune 500 CEOs are 6 foot tall or taller, where only 14.5% of the general male population is 6 foot tall or taller. 30% of those same Fortune 500 CEOs are 6'2" or taller, where only 3.9% of the general male population is 6'2" or taller. We look at height and we just imbue them with success, and we think that they'll do well. One study has shown that 1 inch in height can equal up to $789 a year in salary. Okay, here's another experiment. The University of Illinois wanted to know how race affected group decision making. So they took college students and they put them in groups of 3. Some of the groups had 3 white students and some had 1 or 2 white students with other minority students. They wanted them to solve a murder mystery. So they gave them all some baseline information, and then they gave each individual student a little bit different information. Then they put them together in these teams to see who could solve these murder mysteries. The teams with more diversity solve the murder mysteries more accurately, more often. The theory is that when we're always in a group of people who we think like us, then we won't necessarily share all of our information. We'll think they've had the same experiences, I don't have to share that again. But when we're in a diverse group, we will often share more information as long as we're comfortable. And we'll talk about belonging later. We'll share often more information and we'll be more successful. So that means that this group is going to often do better than this group, but also better than this group or this group. Sometimes we can get caught up in this mindset that diversity means non-white male. Diversity actually means a diversity of experiences. If we've got all women or all Black men, that's not necessarily a diverse group. They might be different from the white male group that you might see in some business world, but they will also fall victim to some of the same groupthink and miss out on some of the same benefits of having a diverse group of information. This isn't limited to race. The Oklahoma State University did a study with 186 students, and they had them talk about controversial subjects like abortion. And they said, okay, you have to develop a position, and you're going to be matched up with one other student who's going to develop the opposite position, and you need to try to persuade each other which position is right. Well, they asked all of these students, do you identify as Democrat or Republican? Some they matched up with those of the same political affiliation, and some they matched up with a different political affiliation. And what happened was, when Republicans were matched up with Republicans, they were less well prepared and less argumentative in proving their position than when they were matched up with a Democrat. And unless any Democrats out there feel any pride about that example, the same exact thing happened on the other way. Democrats matched up with fellow Democrats were less well prepared, less aggressive, less pushy in forcing their claims. It's not limited to race. It's political party. It's anything that we affiliate ourselves with. So what if we really are uncomfortable with certain people, whether they're Black or Muslim, overweight, different sexual orientation? What do we do about it? We consciously address or intentionally address these unconscious biases. So first, we recognize the bias, and that's what we spent a lot of time doing today with a lot of these slides. We define the bias, and we've done a little bit of that. I'll talk a little bit more about it. We control the bias. I'll give you some suggestions on how we can control biases. We reduce the biases. I'm going to talk about that too. And then we work to eliminate the biases. So first, we recognize and define or label the biases, right? We talked about the halo effect, this tendency to see the good about someone. Now we have to say in an organization, how can the halo effect elevate one employee's performance review while downgrading others? If you've got an employee who's always out with the bosses, going to happy hour together, often that can influence their performance review, right? Because you have these great feelings about them. How can perception bias, right, the tendency to form stereotypes, affect promotions? Well, we know that it can affect them by having people that are 6 foot tall or taller are often in leadership positions, right? Very good. Sorry, so just so you know, I'm working on my computer screen, so I'm working through lots of questions and answers, and I really appreciate these. And I'm going to stop right now. I won't stop for all the questions, but I'm going to answer this one. Can you please mention while having people of color safe spaces, like a people of color happy hour is needed, despite the fact that it's not as diverse as you just defined it? So I'm a big advocate when I'm working with companies on their own diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging programs of affinity groups. And sometimes people say, well, why do you do an affinity group where you're going to completely separate all of the Black employees, all of the Hispanic employees, all of the LGBTQ employees, where they should be interacting with others? Why are you going to completely separate them? Well, we are going to unite under the whole umbrella of the company and under diversity and inclusion committees, but often it's important to have a safe space so that someone feels comfortable sharing all of their thoughts and ideas. What makes that successful is that if at least some people in that group have connections outside of the group so that you can have the benefits of the in-group, but also use those benefits and the things you learn within those groups to improve the overall organization. So having a people of color happy hour, whatever it may be, can create the type of relationships that will allow us to have these intentional conversations. And I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Thank you for that question. Another recognition is how can the affinity bias, a tendency to warm up to somebody like us, harm or help an organization? So this is how we recognize. Remember, I talked about identifying, recognizing, continuing to work through those. Harvard's implicit association test. I mentioned this earlier, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it right now and show you how it works in real time, show you how your brain works. So if you look at this image initially, you might think that the black man on the right is holding a gun, right? Some type of automatic weapon. In actuality, what is he holding? He's holding a camera, and that's a camera boom. One of Harvard's implicit association tests our association of black people with dangerous weapons or white people with dangerous weapons. Of more than 500,000 people who took this test between April 2004 and then 2015, here are how the percentages played out. 24% of people who took that test showed a strong association of black people with weapons and white people with harmless objects. 30% showed a moderate association of black people with weapons and white people with harmless objects, and 19% showed a slight automatic association of black people with weapons and white people with harmless objects. That means about 3/4 of people, when they see two people, black and white with different objects, will automatically say that black people have a dangerous weapon and white people have a harmless object. Do you see how that could affect unarmed black men being killed by police or unarmed black people being killed by police? And I'm not here to talk about Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. I've got friends that are white male police officers who are amazing people and friends, and they're fantastic. With that said, all of us have some biases, and the Harvard Implicit Association Test will help us recognize that. And this is just one example how biases can affect how we treat others. Okay, I'm going to show you now kind of how your brains work, and then we're going to bring someone on for a question in just a minute. But first, I'm going to show you how I want you to look at your screen here. And I want you to remember that the unconscious portion of your brain reacts immediately, so you can get 11 million pieces of information. And the conscious portion of your brain takes a little bit longer, and you can process 40 pieces of information. And I want you to look at your screen. You're muted, I think. Oh, actually, you're not. There's only the panelists here. I want you to, when you see a color right now, whatever color you see, I want you to say it out loud. Please do it so I can help explain, and you can see your brain in action, right? So I'll say it: red, green, black, red. Do you see that? Did you see how your brain, your conscious and unconscious brain, had a little battle with each other? Because you automatically start reading. Your unconscious brain reads the words, and your conscious brain has to identify the colors. Do it again. Red, purple, yellow, red. Just that slight time allows us to consciously address the fact that our initial reaction might not be the right reaction. What happened, and I think based on Brent in the chat, I think we're going to bring on Lisa. Do I need to stop sharing my screen, Brent, to bring her on?
Yeah, if you can stop so we can highlight Lisa so she can ask her question. Lisa, I'm going to ask you to unmute because you're here with us, and I'm going to.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
We can.
On also.
So I posed a question in the chat that I think many probably in this audience have had discussion and debate about, but interested to hear the thoughts from the panelists about. I asked about what are your thoughts on the ability and capacity of African American and Blacks to be racist? Since some view the root of racism as privilege and power, having the ability to affect change, sustainable change, and that creates the disenfranchisement of minorities or others is really what racism is able to do. So, you know, with the absence of the ability to affect infrastructure, systems, and policies, do African American and Blacks really have the capacity to be racist? And so wanted to hear some thoughts on that.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for that question. And so a lot of people say, I'm Black, I can't be racist on one level, individually racist. And one, they say, I'm Black, I cannot affect your life the same way that I could if I was white, or the system were white. Most people, positions of power are white. So can individuals do, and this is one reason why I love Professor Kendi's example, all of us can do things that are racist things and anti-racist things. Some of us, maybe we come from our own privilege, wealth, education, power, that maybe we would use power of the system to affect someone else. But the principle that Lisa's talking about is, at the end of the day, if a white person says, hey, that Black person is being racist to me, for the most part, white people can go home, they can go to work and their bosses are white, their coworkers are white, they can turn on TV, their superheroes are white, their main characters are white, they can go to church, they can go to the supermarket, anywhere they go, they can go back to a position of comfort, and it's only a temporary slight that they've experienced. This is one line of thought, such that Black people in America don't have the power structure to push racism on someone else. So that's one school of thought. I think that's a larger look at racism, and absolutely racism, a key part of racism is power. And that's why microaggressions are such a big deal. We looked at that video of the look. Microaggressions have been compared to a bee sting, right? If you get stung once, it's not fun. If you're not allergic, it's not fun. You don't love it, but life goes on. But if you get stung 10 or 15 or 20 times a day, you're going to move. You're going to find some other profession. You're going to stop spending time outside. And that is Lisa's question there about racism. When the whole system is constantly stinging you, then racism can have a longer effect and a more powerful effect on you. If you can change the system, then it won't have as much of an effect on you. I love, there's a line from one of Jay-Z's raps. He says, we used to use umbrellas to chase the bad weather, but now we travel first class and change the forecast, right? We used to have to put up these structures in order to face this system, but now we change the system. And so I love that question from Lisa. That could be talked about for hours and hours and hours. On an individual level, can Black people do racist things? Absolutely. You can do racist things on an individual level. As a system, can there be systemic racism, pro-Black people and anti-white people? Not often, not often. It would be extremely, extremely rare. I can't really think of it. I try to think of sports leagues, even like the NBA that is so dominant with Black players. But even then, you can't have the system because the owners, GMs, et cetera, are not within that same racial structure. So is it possible? In theory, it's possible. Can you have systemic racism, pro-Black, anti-white? Not generally if all the power is in one hand or the other. So great question. I appreciate that question. Okay, let me see if I can, I got to end my slideshow now and jump back into sharing and start it back where we are. Hopefully I get that right. But thank you for that question. Okay, so back to how our brains work. We just showed our colors and how your brain would process one. What happens is your amygdala, that's the fight or flight center, that is the part of the brain that evolved to detect danger. And if it's too active, things that are benign, you'll be worried about everything. You'll be afraid of everything because you're scared of Black people, you're scared of men, you're scared of whatever. If it's not active enough, then we'll take increased risks. So you'll want to make sure that you do, for example, mindfulness studies, and I think I might have a slide on that. MRI scans show that after an 8-week course of mindfulness practice, your fight or flight center appears to shrink. And then what happens is your prefrontal cortex that's associated with higher order brain functions will become thicker and become more important in decision making. So if unconscious bias is a result of the brain's lightning speed and taking in, tagging, and sorting information, we can put in structures for activities such as decision making, such as resume screening. So for this, remember this example, Brendan, Greg, Emily, and Ann getting 50% more interviews. Some companies just simply take names off of resumes. You don't have to worry about that. You just redact the names from the resumes. I'm going to pause for a second so that I can make sure I get the, make sure that I can keep the, keep the chat box on there because I didn't get it. I saw some chat, and even though I might not respond to all of them, I want to make sure that I can see the chat box while I'm there. Okay. So what can we do? Can we work to change our biases? And so this is in academia, people say, well, I am who I am. I can't change my biases. That is who I am. My answer is yes, we really can change our biases. So how? This image right here, these are my parents. These are my parents in the very early 1970s, actually 1970, I think. Look at them, this beautiful wedding. You can see the black folks, white folks, all these smiles, everybody's smiling except Uncle Joe there. Can you see Uncle Joe? That's probably how they were all feeling inside, is like Uncle Joe. Our families did not like it. They didn't love it. My dad's family did not want him to marry a white woman. My mom's family did not want her to marry a black man. This was not, in many places, it was still illegal, at least on the books, for interracial marriage, especially with a black person and a white person. Well, over time, as our family members learned the story of my parents, as my dad became Ron and no longer the black man, and as my mom became Cheryl and no longer the white woman, they learned their stories. They developed these affinities for each other, and their biases towards them reduced. And then as we as kids came along and they had more experiences, many of those biases were reduced over time. As a society, biases against LGBTQ community have significantly reduced. For example, over the last 30 years, in 1986, only 11% of people in the United States believe that those who identify as LGBTQ should be able to marry someone of their same assigned gender. 30 years later, 68% of people agreed that they should be able to marry someone of their same gender. This is how societal biases have changed, kind of like the smoking example I shared earlier. How do we do it? Stories. Remember how I talked about stories? Good stories really bind us to people. We can feel empathy. I'm going to play this short video and explain power of stories. This is a great story taken from the movie The Good Dinosaur.
Butch, how'd you get your scar?
I don't know if you're ready for that story.
I can take it. Oh, yeah, you gotta tell Pop. That's a good one.
It was 100 degrees in the shade. I walked for 5 days with no water. Then I saw it, a pretty pond. I bent down to take a drink when these crocs launched out of the water. One croc bit me on the face. Ain't no way I wasn't at supper. Except for one thing. I wasn't ready for dying that day. I bit one croc in half, tail whipped the other, and the last one, well, I drowned that croc in my own blood.
Dang! Oh, look. Gives me little goosies every time. I love that story.
So I love that story too. This is one of my favorites. Why? Because we are cheering on what is maybe known as the most ferocious being that's ever lived on this earth, right? This T-Rex, this mean T-Rex. And he's telling a story in a way that we start cheering for him. The oxytocin spikes in our brain that we cheer for him. As we consciously have these conversations and intentionally have them, we can intentionally cheer for others even if they are different from us. We can consciously and intentionally cheer for them even if in the past they may have been seen as big and scary or harmful. How do we do it? You heard me earlier talk about, hey, don't ask somebody, where are you from, if you want to know their background. So what can we do if we want to know their background? Well, we can authentically get their stories. If we want to know their nationality or place of birth, is that a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. Instead of asking, where are you from? What can we ask? Maybe we can say, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your childhood. What's your earliest memory? Did you have any nicknames growing up? Series of questions where we get to know an individual and who they are, where they can choose to identify themselves as Black, or white or LGBTQ or whatever it is, but they are putting an identity on themselves. We see them as a human being and they can identify how they wish, right? So let's talk about some actions. Now we're going to get into action and I've got a few of these. I'd love to see the ideas in the chat if you have ideas. So I'm going to be watching, okay? So here we go. Once we see it, what do we do about it, right? I don't know if any of you saw this guy on the on the internet, but here he is at a store and the worker is arranging the hot dogs and the hot dog buns. Great. Now he's in an aisle and the worker's arranging the snacks right behind him. And now he's in another spot and the worker is again being very, very helpful right behind him. What's going on is something that I've seen so many times in my life, is that he's getting followed around in the store. And he's just taking an image in case people think, oh, what, I don't see it. Well, this happens all of the time. So what do we do when we see it? Okay. We have a conversation. I'm going to give you some tools and we're going to have some of those conversations. Here's what Alana Connor over at Stanford says. Telling someone they're racist, sexist, and xenophobic is going to get you exactly nowhere. It's such a threatening message. One of the things we know from social psychology is when people feel threatened, they can't change, they can't even listen, right? So remember the amygdala, when they get into fight or flight, it will be all defensive. It will be attacks. We won't make very much room in the conversation. Escalating tension is often a less effective way of addressing racism and bias. So what do? Let me share with you some strategies, right? And here's one of the common microaggressions that you'll often hear about, taken from one of my favorite Disney movies, Enchanted. Here we have this lady touching a Black woman's hair. Oh my goodness, your hair is lovely, right? Wow. What are some strategies for addressing some of these? I'm going to tell you the strategy, then we're going to walk through them. So one is to build a support team around you, both a formal and an informal support team. That's affinity groups, that's diversity and inclusion committees. That's just a group of your friends. Right away, you have a support team in place because you want to be able to report to somebody and talk to somebody and bounce off of them some ideas about this incident that happened. You want to have personal connections to this support group, and they need to have connections to the top, especially if you're working in an organization so something can happen, actually change can happen. Second, after you build a support team, you want to calmly but directly address the incident. It could either be formal or informal or informal. It's a teachable opportunity. You'll have to make the decision. Do I need to address this incident right now in front of a larger group? Or should I address this incident later in a private setting? You'll need to worry about the context. Then the third item is to report the incident. So depending on the level of the incident, you'll want to report it at different levels. It may be to your peer group, it may be to your sponsor or mentor, it may be to your affinity group, it may be to the CEO. But here's a pattern, and we're going to walk through a few of these, and I hope to have your help in the chat. So we'll build a support team, we'll directly address, have this intentional conversation, and then we'll report it. So build a support team, and I'm just going to breeze through these because I want time to go through them. You find out people around you that are going to be able, that you can have honest, open conversations, and you can find support through them. Participate in affinity groups, resource groups, etc. You also find a leader who has the courage and the willingness and ability to move a conversation forward. You intentionally address it when you see it. You don't just let it fester forever, but you intentionally address it. You ask yourself, was this statement intentional? What did they mean by what they did? How did it really affect you? Is it appropriate? And so you can ask them questions like, hey, what did you mean when you said that? Or try to relate to them why a particular question was a problem. Then you can report it. Everyone should be able to work in an environment where you're not being harassed and distressed, right? Find a leader who listens to you. Okay, let's walk through some of these now. Studies show that many women of color, especially Black women, experience bias in the workplace related to their hair. So African-American professor Leslie Culver says she's experienced this firsthand. She was at a conference earlier, this was, I think it was 2019, where she was asked by a white colleague whether or not her braids were her natural hair. Okay, what do you say in response to that? She says, at the time, I didn't even know what to say, right? So many of us are in these situations where we have something that's racist or discriminatory, and we don't know what to say and we freeze. So let me tell you let's talk about George Floyd for a quick second. And I don't want to do him any injustice here by being so brief. The main officer who had his knee on his neck and who was killing this man, knew he must have known what he was doing. The other officers, rookie officers, one of them part African American, had actually joined the police force because he wanted to see more diversity, more inclusion. But in the time, he did nothing about seeing George Floyd get killed by this other officer. Why not? He froze. He wasn't prepared. He hadn't done these, and these are some of the things that I work with companies. We walk through these steps to know how to react. So this is Leslie Culver saying, I didn't even know what to say at the time. So that's what we're doing for the next 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to know what to say. Weigh the pros and cons of how to address it. So what do you say? I'd like to see it in the chat. You're there, maybe you're the Black woman, or maybe you're somebody who observes it, and the colleague comes up and touches their hair and says, is this your real hair? What do you say? How could you address that situation? I'd love to see some comments in the chat. Yeah, why would you think this isn't my real hair? Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it's going to be, how do you say it? Why would you say this isn't my real hair? Well, somebody's going to get defensive. But you could say, so what would make you ask that question about why it's my real hair? You could say, I feel offended by that assumption. Oh, I love this one. I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by that question. Can you tell me why you're asking that? I love it. That's non-confrontational, and that allows them to see their own biases. You can say, that's not a real polite question. Yeah, very good. Oh, there's one. That's a really personal question. Why do you ask? I love it. I love it. That's a personal question. Why do you ask? You're not threatening with them, but you're identifying that this is a concern. It was someone's real hair at some time. Love it. Be careful who says that. You can ask them if that's their real hair. This is so good. Malia Dunn, as a white woman, if I were in the same space, I might say, you've never asked me that question. Oh, fantastic, fantastic. You're going to get some kickback if you say that. But yeah, someone says, lighten the mood with a joke. Someone says, yes, it's on my head. Very good. Very, very good. These are ways. Oh, I love this. I am not a pet. Please do not touch my hair. Yes. If you're in a empowered situation to say that. Love it. Let's move on to another one. Let me give you a little bit more. When you identify a disparity or bias, like someone pointing out their hair, you need to be ready that you've activated their amygdala and it's going to be fight or flight. So someone says, hey, you're taking that the wrong way. I didn't mean it that way, right? What do you do when they say that? Well, people who say or do racist or insensitive things, they want you to focus on their intentions rather than on the negative effect it had on you. So they're saying, whoa, you're judging me the wrong way. I didn't mean it that way. So what can you say in response to that? It's something that someone had just said in the chat. Hey, if I can't tell you that I'm offended without you like attacking me and saying you're taking this the wrong way, how can we ever build relationships and have conversations, right? So this is one of the ways. You're taking it the wrong way. I didn't mean it that way. Well, one way you can respond is to say, hey, I just wanted to have a conversation to know why you were touching my hair or why you were touching her hair. I just wanted to know what you meant by it. You say you didn't mean it that way. What did you mean? Let's have a conversation, right? So this is one of the examples. If you're the one who said something inappropriate or offensive, right? I hope none of us in here are thinking, man, I'm so high and mighty, I've never done something like that. Most of us have done a microaggression one way or another. Even you, like I showed with the little kids, you can be Black and have an anti-Black bias. A lot of us have done those things. So what if you are and someone calls you out? How can you respond? You can say something like, you know what? I didn't mean for that to be offensive, but I could see how that could be offensive. So I apologize for that. Or if you say something you truly don't think is offensive, you could say, you know what? I'd like to understand a little bit better how what I said was offensive. So can you explain to me why you thought it was offensive? So these are just tools, right? But be ready for it. So here's another one. Example 2. Hey, I'm not racist, right? Unfortunately, this phrase almost always comes before or after a racist comment, right? I'm not racist, but, or hey, I wasn't racist. Oh, there's my alarm that tells me I need to wrap up soon. So unfortunately, most people, when they say this, they don't understand what racism is. So what can you do? Oh man, back to the chats. What can you do if you identify an action and someone comes and says, hey, I'm not racist. How can you respond to that? When someone says, I'm not racist, or I'd like to see it in the chats again. And while you're going in the chat, SNO and Essen, you know what? I've talked to you a few times. I think it's O2. But he says addressing microaggressions, particularly in a workplace, has a lot to do with psychological safety. And many people of color won't address them because of the associated risk. Yes. What opportunities do allies have to help address microaggression? So I just gave a pattern a few minutes ago about building a group around you, a support group. And so one of the things you can do is you can be a part of that support group so that if you can't identify it right away, for example, so many of us have some friends or coworkers that we know they say insensitive things, racially or otherwise. When you go to talk with that person, build your support group around you. Take them with you so that when this person says something that we know they're going to say, your support group can step up. You don't have to be the one. So what opportunities do allies have? They can be a support group, absolutely, to address microaggressions, and they can speak up also. Very good. Very good. I love some of these comments, and I'm not going to be able to address them all. I hope you're picking up on some of these fantastic comments about how to respond. Someone says, I'm not racist. You can say, well, what you said came off as racist, or that was a racist statement. Or I love this question by Victoria Stenson. What does that mean to you? When someone says, I'm not racist, you can say, oh, what do you mean by that? I was talking with a friend of mine the other day who has different thoughts and views than me. And he said, well, in the Civil War, hundreds of thousands of white men died also to help free the slaves. Don't they get credit? And I just simply said, what kind of credit are you looking for? Right? Like, tell me about it. I could fight and argue, and I could talk about how millions of Black people gave their lives in this country under the slavery, et cetera. But instead of getting that argument, I said, well, what do you mean? What kind of credit are you talking about? And he reflected on that and thought, oh, I don't know what kind of credit I'm talking about, right? Very good. Very good. I love these answers, these questions and answers, and these comments. We could literally do this panel all day long, but I wanted to give you some opportunities. One more example. Now you're playing the race card, right? You say something to someone says, now you're playing the race card. Let me give you a little bit of help on that. This is how one person who feels uncomfortable about something shuts the conversation down. By saying you're playing the race card, it's saying you are not allowed to talk about race. I'm uncomfortable talking about race, so you're not allowed to talk about it. So what can you say? Because not talking about race will not get us very far. You can say, what do you mean by playing the race card? What do you mean? Tell me about it. Instead of shutting the conversation down, you've now opened the conversation up. And you can, and people are going to be defensive, and you can feel contentious, right? You can feel contentious. Take breaths, practice, literally, it might sound silly, literally practice these so that when someone says it, you don't get so heated that you get their fight or flight and there can't be any response at all. Man.
Hey, Tim, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Brent.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to bring somebody live, Rowdy Duncan, if you're okay with that right now.
Love it.
He had a comment in the Q&A, but I know he has a question. So.
Okay, my time was 10:30, so I'm ready to wrap up when you.
We're good. We did some questions. Hey, Rowdy, please unmute, and if you'd like to do your camera as well, so we can all see your handsome face. You're live, Rowdy.
Yeah, just give me a second.
Oh, you got it.
For the camera part that's lagging a bit. So my question, as I work through the camera issue, is I find one of the biggest problems that we have when we're talking with folks with the things that you're discussing here with us, Tim, is separating identity from behavior, right? So when you point out something, right, like, and I think you were kind of touching on this to a degree before, you were talking a little bit about, I'm not racist, but, and then you're like, well, like, I'm not talking about your identity. Like, I'm talking about
noun, right? That's what Professor Sandy says. I'm not talking about the noun. I'm not calling you a racist. I'm not saying you are permanently a racist. What I'm saying is that action that you just took was racist. That action, that's beautiful. I love it, Rowdy. Absolutely. Because once you talk about somebody's identity, they're going to fight you tooth and nail. You are talking about me, like, or talking about my mama. Like, you're talking about, that's what I am. And I'm going to fight you about what I am. And that's a great way to point it out, Rowdy, is to say, well, I'm not saying that you are a racist, because I personally think that all of us can do things that are racist or that are anti-racist. What I'm saying is that thing that you did, I saw it as racist, in that racism is defined as blah, blah, and you start the conversation. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Rowdy. I love it.
Yeah, no, thanks. Because a lot of times when having the conversations, I think people get so defensive with identity stuff. And I'm like, it's just behavior stuff that we want to discuss. And untangling identity and behavior is so hard. So thanks.
Well, and it's key, Rowdy, and it's key because of this. If you are talking about somebody's identity, they are going to fight it. These are difficult conversations. And when the conversation is shut down because someone's blown up on anger, you don't benefit. Somebody might say, have the courage to have this difficult conversation. Absolutely. It may take more courage to have a calm and productive conversation than to say, you're a racist, get out of my face, right? Because then you're shutting down the conversation. And guess what? When we don't talk about it, we're not making progress. Mm-hmm. So these examples that I'm giving right now, and I love that example by Rowdy, is it's preparing us. We set up a group around us. We decide how to address it, whether we address it right now, later. Are the tensions in the air such that we shouldn't address it right now? I'm a parent. Sometimes my children make poor decisions, and I know if I correct them on the spot in front of a whole group of people, there's not a good way out of that. You just can't do it. You're going to lose because these chemicals are being released in their brains, right? That are going to make them fight. And all of us do it. All of us do it. So changing the dynamic. I love it, Rowdy. We change the dynamic and we talk about actions and not identity. Love it. Love it. Thank you for that. I'm going to get us close to wrapping up here because I know that I only had so much time and you guys got things to do. One more example or a couple examples. I was in my front yard when a black man walked by past my house on the sidewalk. Less than a minute later, a neighbor drove up to my house and said, hey, what's that N-word doing in our neighborhood, right? I saw this example that someone shared. And they were frozen at the time, and they said, yeah, I don't know that person, right? They were just frozen. They didn't know what to do. They didn't want to fight with their neighbor. They didn't want to whatever. But that person looking back said, I should have handled that differently. So think, how could you handle that differently? If you want to share some in the chat, share. I won't have time to do it because my time's going to be up. But think through that situation. How could I handle that differently? How should I respond, right? You see this picture. You remember Amy Cooper in Central Park? I don't have time to share the video, but she threatened to call the police. And Mr. Cooper, whose name I can't believe I just forgot his name. I'm going to it's on my slides though. Christian Cooper responded, and he was like, okay, call the police. She said, I'm going to tell him an angry black man is coming after me and threatening me, right? That is this question about racism and power. I would be very concerned if someone was calling the police and saying an angry black man was coming after them, because I know that I don't want to get killed, right? And that's where there's power in racism, where someone can use that against you. But Christian Cooper, do you know how he responded to it? He said, call the police. He was calm. And then the police, and so Amy Cooper was charged with a crime. And Christian Cooper said, you know what? I am not going to testify against her. I'm not going to press charges, but we do need to have the conversation. He wasn't going to use the criminal justice system to punish somebody, but he said he wants to have the conversation. That takes courage for him to do that, not to get revenge, but to move the conversation forward, right? Oh, there's so much more about mansplaining or white-splaining. I don't want to sit next to you. What do you do when somebody doesn't want to sit next to you or sit next to somebody else? What happens if you're overlooked by someone because of race or gender? I want you to think through these things. How will I respond? I want you to prepare your responses for when it happens. When I do something and somebody tells me, you don't act black, how am I going to respond, right? Am I going to bust their nose? How am I going to respond to move the conversation forward? Hey, you're just here because
you've got some time. Keep going. You've got some time. I will adjust according to you. I want you to get through this. This is more important than our wrap up. So please take your time. We've got time. You go for it.
Well, let's just do two of these then. Okay. And I want to see the chat. So let me open the chat back up on my screen because I see them out there and I love it. Okay, here we go. Less qualified employee receives a promotion you think you deserve. They may be white, they may be male. What do you do? How do you address this? This goes to our systemic racism that we talk about. I'm in the legal field where less than 2% of partners are African-American, right? African-American are 13% of the United States and now 5 to 6% of attorneys, but partners are less than 2%. What do you do? This is how it goes in our system. And I'm looking at the chat. What do you do? A less qualified employee receives a promotion you think you deserved or that you think your colleague deserved. What do you do? Show me in the chat. What are some things you can do? You might have your support group in place. Do you report it now? Do you report it later? How do you do it? Okay. One says, focus on me. Ask my leader what I can do to earn a promotion too. Yeah, you can. If you don't get the promotion, you can say, hey, I felt like I was really qualified. Can you work with me about how I didn't get it? So let me tell you, as an attorney, we go out and we want to do business. We want to do business with people. I want to work with other people. And even as a diversity consultant, I want to do business. So I'll do a pitch when there's a request for business. And when I don't get the business, I'll often say, hey, would you mind sharing with me why you didn't pick me? Because I want to be able to make myself I want to do better next time so that I can earn your business. So that's really good. I like that. Ask my leader, what can I do to get a promotion? And you can do that for a coworker too. Hey, I really felt like so-and-so was really qualified. Tell me why you made the decision for this person over this person. The person making the decision might not even know they made that decision. So just to have that conversation goes and helps break down this systemic discrimination. Okay, I'll go to the next one. You just finished a presentation for a business meeting. All the feedback was great, and somebody comes up to you, says, man, you are so well-spoken. You are so articulate. Man, you're so different from the other Black people around here. You don't act Black. How do you respond to that? Let's hear that. You don't act Black. If you either heard that as a Black person, or if you heard that as a non-Black person and you saw somebody say that to someone else, how do you respond when someone says, you don't act Black? Let's hear it. Let's see it in the chat. What do you mean by that? I love it, Grace. What does that look like? Rochelle, I love it. What do you mean? Yeah. How should a Black person act exactly? How do you act Black? What does it mean? What does acting Black look to you? Like, I love it. What you're saying, some person has just made this snap judgment on their initial thought, right? Robert Wallace, I love it. How do you expect me to act? What do you expect me to do, right? Someone has used their unconscious brain to make this racist or discriminatory statement, and you can, rather than attack them, you can say, yeah, tell me about it. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by this? I love it. Jessica Hirschhorn, and I apologize for butchering your name. I've gotten, you don't seem Jewish because of your name, right? The same thing. You don't seem Jewish. What does that mean? What do I need to do? My daughter gets it all the time. You don't look gay. Okay. What does that mean? And why are we having that? I love it. I love it. I love it.
Tim, before we go on, we're bringing someone live. I'm talking about names, Naleli Ballesteros. So if you want to join us by unmuting and turning on your camera and asking your question, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you, Brent. So my question for you, Tim, is, when you mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, and you kind of brought it up during the presentation as well, is that you would get asked, hey, where you're from? You speak Spanish, and they can't really figure you out. And my question is, if your reaction or your response would be different if it was asked from, let's say, a minority, a Mexican or an Asian person, or an Indian, so on. Like, was your response different?
Yeah, great question. So do I respond differently to someone saying that? It depends. So thank you for that question. And I'm sorry. Can you come on and tell me how you say your name?
Yeah, it's Nayeli.
Nayeli. Very good, Nayeli. Thank you for that question. I've got a lot of experience in this, and so I try to consciously address it. But let's take me out of that mind frame. If I'm out shooting hoops or something, a white guy comes up and says, "What's up, brother?" I'm like, okay, we'll talk about that. Whereas a Black guy comes up and says, "What's up, brother?" I'm gonna be like, "What's up, brother?" And I'm not even gonna think once about it, right? Yes, not only am I seen differently, but my own biases cause me to treat somebody differently. So yes, if a person, and it depends on the context of the conversation. If we're having conversations about something, and I can tell they're really talking about geography, like, hey, where are you from? like it's a where did you grow up, then I'll whatever, I'll talk about where I grew up. But if someone I can tell is trying to ask me about my nationality, my race, etc., I will often turn one of those questions on them to say, what do you mean? Like I grew up in California, but like, what is that what you're asking? And I'll try to, we can make conversations difficult for them, right? These difficult conversations, or we can actually make these difficult conversations easier and educational. So I love that question. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and the reason why I asked this is because I actually get that a lot myself, and then when you said that, it really kind of made me think like how I responded as well, without even thinking, that sometimes we have our own biases. And when I would get asked when I was in college, and they would say, "Oh my gosh, you have an accent. Where are you from?" And I'm like, "What? What do you mean where I'm from? I'm from here." Like, but my reaction would be different if I were to get asked from somebody that also had an accent, in college, or they were foreign students, and that my reaction would be different. And I started to think about that when you asked that, because I'm like, oh, I would get asked that question. But then I realized that when it was somebody that wasn't a minority, I would get a little bit upset, like not upset, but more like uncomfortable, like, well, why do you care, kind of a thing, So yeah. I just thought I would pose that question, since I'm sure you get that a lot, and congratulations on the Spanish. Good job.
Gracias, muchísimas gracias. Okay, so I love that. I love it. We don't have time. This is a whole separate conversation, but I'm just going to introduce the idea of other and otherism, right? We all identify among numerous things: race, education, socioeconomic status, language, where we're from, nationality. Like I could list, and in some of my trainings, we'll list 30 different ways about how we identify. If someone is asking us a question as an other, then we're going to respond a little bit more defensively. If someone is asking us a question as part of the in-group, then we're going to treat that differently. I hope that's not like technical educational jargon that is dumb and not really helpful, but that is one way that will help us to respond. Okay. I'm going to wrap up with this: diversity and inclusion and belonging, right? So diversity is like inviting someone to the party, right? Inclusion is like asking them to dance. Have you heard that before? This is Verna Myers. I think she's at Netflix now. Diversity is like inviting someone to the party. Inclusion is like asking them to dance. Do you see the difference when you're at a party and you got a bunch of wallflowers and others you invite them to dance? Well, I'm going to add one more. Belonging is asking that person to teach you a dance, right? Unless they're Black, then that's a microaggression. No, I'm just kidding about that one, right? But the belonging is asking that person for their perspective. We want them to feel so comfortable that they can share, even if it's a perspective that's they say something racist and you say, man, tell me about that. And they can explain where they're coming from so that you can build bridges. But most often it's someone who's diverse, who's LGBTQ, who's Black, who's a woman, who's poor, who's an immigrant, whatever. Invite them to belong, listen to them, value their ideas. When you do, diversity, inclusion, and belonging becomes powerful. We empower every individual to their fullest capacity. I'm religious, so please forgive me for this. I believe that every person is a child of God, and I want to see them as that before I see them as Black, white, Hispanic, American, Republican. I don't care what it is. I want to see them as equal to me. And if we do that, we will empower the conversation, and we will consciously, intentionally address these biases and move towards equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. So thank you. Happy to do whatever else you'd have me to do. Joanna, Brent, thank you. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Tim. We did have Cinnamon Scott had a question in the Q&A, which was, what does acting Black mean?
Yes. So you're just going to know, I just talk. I teach a class called Race and the Law at Arizona State University Law School. And in that class, we study the history of race in the United States. And so those critical race theorists and those who subscribe to this believe that race is a social construct. What do I mean? Prior to race-based slavery, there was no black and there was no white. There was Ethiopian, Nigerian, etc. There was nationality, but not race. Well, when you had race-based slavery, it was all lumped into black, and then there was no white. There was, European, Scandinavian, whatever. That becomes white. Well, what happened was white was associated with citizenship, rights, property ownership, ability to serve in different capacities, jobs, offices, etc. Black became not that. So what often happened, and I teach these courses, is that someone came into court, and if they wanted to be able to own property, they had to act white or not black to be able to show that they were a citizen. They can own property, etc. So acting white and acting black became a way to demonstrate that you were part of the in-group who had rights or not a part of the other group. And so what is it seen as now? Often acting white is seen as speaking a certain way, participating in certain professional circles, etc. I think that definition is going to change significantly as we have diversity, inclusion, belonging, and anti-racism, and that we will have more leadership in these professional circles that are not white, so that you can just act like a leader. Leader will no longer be synonymous with white. You can be a leader. And that won't mean necessarily what people are doing now. It could mean something different later in the future. So I love that. What does it mean to act black? What does it mean to act white? I can tell you from a legal perspective what it means, but from a social perspective, it's often acting like the in group or the outer group. Great question.
Excellent. Wonderful. Tim, you are amazing. Thank you. And I did not request the Bieber slide, regardless of what Tim says. So I did not. So that was amazing. Do we have any more questions? While we've got Tim here, I would love for you, if you all have any more questions in the Q&A, in the chat that you would like to either go live to ask Tim or would like to just type in the chat and we can read so that Tim can answer, or just kind of anything that you need clarification with, whether it was a definition that you read as you went along. But yeah, that's the hair thing is one of mine, Tim. I got to tell you that. And I use the pet thing because it literally is a pet peeve of mine, where people sometimes don't even ask. I've had people just reach over and and I'm like, I am not a pet. I'm gonna need you to, I'm not someone's dog that you just, lovingly
You gotta give them the quick.
Right, and I tell someone you're gonna reach over and get back. So and I always say I equate it to being when I was pregnant. And why would you come over and touch someone's stomach when they're pregnant? It's such a personal thing in such a personal space. Hair is the same thing. You would never just reach over, you would never do that you would never do that to a male. You would never see someone walk up to a man and go, oh, I love your hair. That's not a thing. So, but yet with women, especially with Black women, we feel emboldened, somehow because they've decided to wear this hair or, whatever it is, braids or curls, or that it's our right to then be able to reach over and touch them. And
well, absolutely. And Joanna, again, based on the history of our country, Black women were owned. Like you were owned. You were a piece of property. So we're going to touch your hair like we touch a horse's mane, like we touch our pets. So pet peeve is right, and your response is right. I am not your property. I
said that to someone. She was offended, and she was like, "Well, I'm offended at that." And I said, "And how do you think I feel?" And I said, I am not a pet. I am going to need you to please not touch my hair. And she's like, well, that's offensive to me. And I'm like, oh, you're offended. That's funny. I'm like, that's funny. But yeah, it's just, and she's like, well, it was a compliment. I just really like your hair. And I was like, well, say it. Words. That's good things. I always tell my children, use your words. I'm going to need you to use your words. Right. So good. Do we have any other questions? I think we do.
We got a question from Salman, and Cinnamon's asking another one. So we got two there, and then we'll be wrapping up. So
take those. Tim, go for it.
Tim, I'm going to let you look at those because Salman's is a long one.
Yeah, very good. So how can you be your true authentic self without worrying about people judging you and worrying about reprimands or repercussions? Yes, I love it. So I am out talking about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm out talking about how people look at Black people differently, younger people differently. And I'm also out asking people for their business. Do you think I don't recognize that my clients think, oh boy, if a judge looks at you differently, I might not want to send my case to you. Yeah, that's a challenge. Like that's a challenge to be authentic and think, boy, I'm gonna get repercussions for that, right? So yes, should you care? You should care. You should care. If you have privilege and power, like I'm educated, I'm experienced, I know I'm extremely valuable to my law firm and to my company, I can speak up. And if a client is being rude or says something racist or whatever, I can say, all right, I just recommend you to go to somebody else because I'm not going to take it because I'm empowered in a place to do it. If you have no power, it's a harder decision to make. If you're choosing between speaking up to educate this individual or to put food on the table to feed the kids, it is different. So should you care? You should care. But the more we can empower each other and empower ourselves, the more we can speak truth to power. And we will be able to speak up for who we really are. I love that. How do you suggest an individual start the process of creating an environment of belonging? So let me tell you about a theory. Again, I'm nerdy about some of these things. It's called intergroup contact theory. That means you have contact with people who are in another group from you, other race, religion, nationality, and you get to know them on an equal social level. Mostly I love breaking bread with people. When you eat with people, you just build a relationship. That actually reduces our biases because then that person becomes not the Black person, not the gay person, not the whatever person, but that person becomes Tim. And now you see me as a human being. So this is one way to create an environment of belonging is building these relationships. And I've got more tips for that you don't want to say, hey, come to my house, you're a Black person. I've never had a Black person in my house. Don't want to say that, right? But you build relationships little by little to get there. Oh, I love this. How do you have these type of conversations with people who are religious, who believe they're good, God-fearing people, but their actions and words show a racial bias, and that their actions aren't as loving as they should be? So I consider myself a Christian, and boy, oh boy, do I struggle sometimes with how us Christians treat other people. Like, I'm just like, So, boy, how do I give this in a non-religious way? If this mostly happens from the Christian, right? We can learn about Christianity. If we call ourselves a Christian, we can learn about it. We can learn about a man whose parents had to flee the country and who was a refugee and who grew up poor, grew up among animals and was treated poorly his whole life, was discriminated against. We can share with them, we can teach them about what the man Jesus Christ lived and what he taught, if this is coming from a Christian perspective. But we don't, a lot of times our good Christian brothers and sisters will say things that are insensitive. And that's when I'll actually use some of the same tools that we talked about over the last half an hour. I would say, oh, okay, well, what do you mean by this? Or the classic bumper sticker wristband question, right? What would Jesus do in that situation, right? So this is a way that, again, the pattern is the same. Ask them simple, innocuous questions that help them consciously or intentionally address these unconsciously racist or biased things that they say. It brings them into the conversation without threatening them into the fight or flight amygdala response. Hope that's helpful.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Tim. Grateful for just the breadth and depth of the information. I know that was a lot, but you wrapped it up so beautifully for us. And I am just grateful. So thank you for your time and your expertise and also for your willingness to share your personal story. And I just think that is how people learn. I think that stories are so powerful. And when people share their personal stories, that's how we really learn. So thank you for the transparency, for sharing your cutie patootie, at least you said 5? Did you say 5, really?
Yes. Let me get them to you if I can find them.
I thought I was busy.
There we go.
Really? Let's see these. I was gonna say, can we see these munchkins?
Yes, give me a quick second to share. Oh, let me get out of my system preferences before I.
And I thought I had a high food bill.
While you're doing that, oh, okay, you got it. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Beautiful, blessed. Wow.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for your comments. Thank you. It was such an honor to be a part of this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Brent,
Tim.
I'm going to go ahead and just, and as we're giving thanks, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our amazing board of directors. As you all know, the work that we do is because of these amazing individuals that you see here. We are governed by an amazing group of individuals in the community that lead us. And they lead us in a way that really is wonderful. We've got, Senna Tu, Lee Barnett, Marion Kelly, who you heard earlier, Phil Pangrazio, Francisco Lucia over at the University of Arizona, and Dominic Bartola, and then Barry Stratford, Michelle Gray, Dr. Mallory Titel, who's also the head of our education committee, Reed Despigliere, and Leslie Scott, who is our treasurer. And so I wanted to show them to you because while you may see me and while you may see, individuals that are in front of you, please know that right alongside us are these amazing individuals that are really helping to guide the organization. So a special thank you to the DLA Board of Directors. And as I'm giving my thanks, I also want to thank our education committee. And they're the ones that are helping with the programming and the planning. And some of them are on the call today. So thank you to all of you. And they're led by Dr. Mallory Titel, who is the head of the education committee. And then of course, the one you hear is Dr. Brent Scholar, who is our webinar planner, our producer, that's really making sure that all the buttons are pushed and everything gets moved around and that everything goes as it should. And I love the quote that Dr. Titel really leads this kind of group with, which is really, we are all in this together, which is this old kind of an African quote that you see here, which is, if you wanna go fast, go alone, but if you wanna go far, go together. So I really love that African proverb. So Mallory, thank you so much for all that you do. Special thank you to Dr. Brent Scholar, and also to Betty Thompson and Tandra Richardson, Jackie Starks, and all of the individuals that really guide our organization. So again, I would just really, I'm humbled by all of these individuals because they spend so much of their time volunteering for us, and we want to make sure we always thank them. So I'll stop sharing that now. What I would love to do is just let you know a little bit about what we have coming up. So as you know, 2020 was all about really kind of talking about uncomfortable conversations. Well, in 2021, the dialogue continues. What we've decided to do is we had so much to talk about. And as we put the surveys out, we wanted to make sure that you guys had more of the conversation. So we really are continuing the conversation. So I'm gonna stop that. And Brent, I don't know if I've stopped sharing my screen. So Brent, I don't know if we have, okay, I've stopped sharing my screen.
Information for January 21st is in the chat for everybody with links to register for the 21st. Okay. And I'll just throw in our new thing that we're going to be doing, everybody. This way you can see me. On January 28th, we're going to do a lunchtime chat. Nothing's really going to be planned. So it's the so Victoria, it's the 21st for the webinar, right? We're going to be talking about cultural humility, and then we're doing a follow-up 1 hour. Myself and Jackie Starks will be leading that. It's a place for you to come and talk to us about what your actions that you're doing to make social transformation or systemic change. Excellent. So it's a brand new thing. So please join us with that.
So in 2021, what I wanted to mention is that in 2021, the uncomfortable conversations continue. We are going to take time to focus squarely on systems and the actions that we must take to dismantle them. So we are going to begin the dialogue series on January 21st, where we'll have the great pleasure of being guided by cultural trainers Suta Calling Last and Tyler Walls of Indigenous Visions. So in this interactive workshop, participants will identify personal beliefs and values and how they influence social transformation within their organizations. And registration is open, so please make sure that you register today and make sure you guys are registered. And what I would like you all to do now is, as you know, inclusion is a journey, and inclusion starts with one simple thing. Inclusion starts with I. So what I would like to do, Brent's going to cue up a video, and I want you guys to watch. Inclusion begins with I. Excellent. Thank you so much. And remember, it all starts with each of us. That is what it's all about. If we all take personal responsibility and personal accountability, that's how it begins. I just wanted to say happy Hanukkah, first of all, to all of our Jewish friends that are celebrating Hanukkah, which begins at sunset tonight, I believe. And it will go on for 8 days, if I'm not mistaken, until the 18th. So happy Hanukkah to all of our Jewish friends, and happy holidays to all of you. We cannot do this work without you. And we are just honored. We are honored to have you as partners. We're honored to have you as friends. We're honored to have you as supporters. And we do not for one instance take for granted that you are here supporting us and that you are fighting the good fight for social justice, for equity, for belonging, and for change. So from all of us here at Diversity Leadership Alliance, happy holidays and have a safe and, most importantly, healthy new year. Thank you so much for joining us. Cheers and have a great, great day. Bye, everyone.